The technique Spielberg likes to employ in his films is using specific landmarks and objects to represent certain ideas and express thematic elements. In E.T., the flower is a landmark. It represents the alien creature's life force. The flower blooms, E.T. is healthy. It withers and decays, and E.T. is sick. A simple but powerful metaphor. In Close Encounters of the Third Kind, the Devil's Tower is a landmark. It represents the unifying consciousness of the unique individuals the aliens have selected to share the eventual close encounter. But Spielberg can also use the landmark technique in more subtle ways, such as in his film Always, which I feel is an underrated gem, with some very impressive stylistic flourishes from the master. Check out this shot. Let's look back at two sequences which utilize the landmark technique to great effect. These two sequences are the lead-up to Pete's untimely and tragic death. Dorinda wants him to hang up his wings and go teach at a flying school, but Pete resists. These two sequences are specifically about Dorinda's premonition regarding his death. Spielberg uses several amazing techniques to develop this idea, while keeping things fluid and interesting. The first sequence is after the dance, when Pete and Dorinda are walking back to her place. Here, Spielberg starts with a tracking shot, following the two lovers as they walk through the forest. The moody blue hue is strongly present and is about to lead into our first landmark, which will start the premonition theme. They arrive in front of Pete's plane, the first landmark. Pete's plane signifies his destiny, as he's going to die in it. The eerie blue lighting in the distance, which matches the hue of the forest, is very haunting and ghost-like, which is appropriate given the circumstances. For Spielberg, it is not just a plane. At this moment, it represents Pete's destiny, and appropriately enough, it sits between the two lovers, visually dividing them. This division is going to play out pretty heavily in the next scene. But first, continuing the same shot, Pete wants her to follow him because he knows a shortcut, but Dorinda is hesitant. She senses something is wrong. This is where the premonition idea begins to take shape. And now we have our first cut, which gives this shot greater symbolism since it was important enough to break the sequence up. It's a slightly quick push-in on Dorinda's worried face as she watches Pete approach the plane. The camera pushing in on a character's face usually represents their state of mind. They could be thinking or about to say something important. It can also be used in reverse to signify a powerful idea, or it can be used to link a group of characters together in order to convey the interconnected nature of the narrative. Regardless, it's the camera reacting to some kind of emotional or thematic element. The quicker nature of this push-in here gives a greater sense of urgency. Something is very wrong and Dorinda can feel it. Instead of cutting to the next scene, here Spielberg employs a dissolve in order to superimpose two images onto each other. This technique visually links two images together, both literally and metaphorically. In this case, it is Dorinda and fire. If you continue to follow the premonition idea, the fact that fire immediately follows the last image of Dorinda's face, it suggests her premonition is indeed about fire. And fire is of course related to Pete, the plane, and his eventual demise in a fiery explosion. This is clear foreshadowing at work here, and Dorinda's sixth sense about it. The dissolve leads to the next scene, which begins one continuous shot, starting from our second landmark, the fireplace, which now represents Pete's impending destruction. The shot continues, panning down to Dorinda's cat. Inconsequential as the cat may seem, it is still part of the continuing idea of the premonition. Cats, and animals in general, have a heightened sense of awareness that most humans don't. They tend to be more instinctual, and we've all heard stories of animals growing restless before an earthquake. So the cat's presence here continues this idea, but also links to the following bit of business. Continuing the same shot, the camera tracks left and comes to Pete and Dorinda's intertwined hands, and our third landmark, the bed. Beds represent warmth, rest, and safety. In this case, it will come to represent where Dorinda wants her and Pete to stay, together, safe, happy. Their intertwined hands show they are very much in love, even though Pete has a hard time expressing it. The camera comes to a rest on Pete and Dorinda lying in bed. Pete is awake, but she's asleep and starts talking in her sleep, saying random words that don't make any sense. In some cultures, sleep and dreams represent the middle ground between reality and the spirit world, a person being closer to it when asleep. Dorinda talking in her sleep represents this idea that she is communicating from the spirit world in a way that Pete doesn't understand. It's a cue that her premonition is going to confuse him as the scene plays out. Also notice the fire in the background, representing Pete's future or what can happen if he doesn't listen to his girl. Pete gets out of bed, quite literally leaving his girl and the safety and warmth of her ideal future. And in a reverse shot from the point of view of the bed and Dorinda, he goes to our fourth and final landmark, the kitchen. As he opens the fridge, the same ghostly, eerie blue glow from the forest and the plain casts itself over his entire body, a visual representation of what awaits him if he ignores Dorinda's premonition. This cool blue cast is in direct contrast to the warmth and safety of the previous shot of Dorinda in the bed. Also, as the scene plays out, the kitchen will come to represent the cold reality of where the relationship really is, not the ideal place she wants it to be, which is represented by the bed. We cut to an important shot here. Dorinda suddenly waking up as soon as Pete is bathed in the eerie blue glow. Remember, cuts are supposed to call attention to certain things. The last shot, the cut to Pete at the refrigerator, was important because it was presenting a new idea into the sequence. The cut above does the same. It ties to this previous shot. Remember, the beginning of her premonition in the forest? The two shots are linked because they are both close-ups, and she has virtually the same worried expression. Together they form and build on the same idea, giving it importance and utilizing the subconscious memory of the audience to make it stand out. Dorinda calls out to Pete, and we cut to this closer shot of Pete, linking the three shots together to form a strong idea. He practically looks ghostly here, and we cut back to her. She knows, even if she can't articulate it. She senses it. Cut back to Pete. He gets his first hint something is up. And in the next cut, she goes and sits down in front of the second landmark, from which more of the scene will play out. A visual representation of the ideas expressed by the characters in the forthcoming dialogue. We cut to a reverse angle of Pete. As he sits down and rubs her, he says,
"It's cold."
In paranormal lore, ghosts generally are described as cold, and rooms tend to get colder when there are ghosts around. Pete is metaphorically becoming ghost-like as he gets closer to the second landmark, the fire that will eventually consume him if he doesn't heed her warning. Eventually Spielberg gets into a couple of over-the-shoulder shots as she expresses a desire to get trained to fly with him. She wants to be there to protect him, but he shoots the idea down. In one shot, we follow her, clearly upset, from the second landmark, representing Pete's deadly future, which she wants to get away from, and she goes to the fourth landmark, representing the cold reality of where they are now in their relationship, away from the warmth of the bed, as she tries to reason with him. She presents an ultimatum, cold hard truth, come with her to Colorado and teach flying, or she'll leave him. Spielberg then cuts back and forth during the dialogue, as they are physically on opposite ends of the room now. They couldn't be further apart. This visually expresses their distance emotionally, with the flames of destiny visually engulfing Pete as he stubbornly refuses to listen. Now Pete enters the cold hard truth of the kitchen, as the camera pushes in while Dorinda walks in the other direction to avoid him. He follows her, and she keeps trying to get away. The cold hard reality of the fourth landmark inciting strife and pain and causing a lot of friction, as neither wants to face reality. After more back and forth movement, Spielberg cuts to this over the shoulder of Dorinda on a long lens. A long lens compresses the images of a shot together so that they appear closer, the long focal length of the lens causing her to become compressed against the warmth and safety of the bed. She is forced to reveal her premonition about his death, and the bed is a visual representation of her desire for safety, as the third landmark represents security. This idea is further reinforced as Spielberg then cuts to this shot. a point of view shot from the bed itself, which will become obvious in a moment as Dorinda turns and comes back toward the bed to get back to its safety and leave the cold truth of reality in the kitchen. The camera pulling back along with her as Pete goes and sits in the chair, which creates another over-the-shoulder shot. From here, Spielberg cuts back and forth between a single of her and an over-the-shoulder of Pete, placing the importance on the bed, since it is in both shots. Pete gets up, moving closer to her, creating a new, closer over-the-shoulder, with him now joining her on the bed, visually signifying that he is coming around to her point of view, back to warmth and safety. From the over-the-shoulder, Spielberg employs a slow push-in shot on Dorinda, as she pours her heart out about the pain she feels knowing his life is at risk all the time. Remember what I said about push-in shots and their emotional importance. Also notice the blazing fire reflected on the side of Pete's face, but not Dorinda's. This is more visual reinforcement of the ideas we've been going over. And to signify this moment of release, Spielberg cuts to a wide shot as they fall into the bed in joy, visually allowing the audience to breathe after this tumultuous sequence. Sidney Lumet used this technique to great effect in 12 Angry Men. After the stressful and tumultuous events inside the deliberation room, where we spent the entire movie, at the end, the camera looms high and wide, giving the audience a huge breath of fresh air. But there is little time to celebrate, as the phone rings and Pete goes to answer, leaving Dorinda alone again. This shot not only signified a release, it also allows Spielberg to create several new ideas at once. For the first time since the beginning, we see the cat, which represented a heightened sense of awareness. We also see the fire again in the background, representing Pete's doom, and Spielberg slowly dollies the camera in to Dorinda, who knows the phone call isn't good. The premonition theme is rearing its ugly head again. The base wants Pete to help with a fire, but he tries to get out of it. Spielberg does a couple of interesting things here. First, he has Pete's voice in the background become fainter and more echoed and more ghost-like. It's very subtle but noticeable. He is heading toward his fate. Then, after a slight push-in, he casts an amber glow on her eyes, as the day and fire become apparent in the background. It's unclear if it's fire or the sun rising, but metaphorically it doesn't matter. The point has been made. She's seeing the future now, and her worried expression says it all as Pete is forced to go deal with the fire and confront his destiny. Spielberg is able to take advantage of all the subtext, thematic material, and metaphor, using the camera to express these concepts in very creative ways that visually elevate the material. It is such a visually arresting and dazzling sequence in a movie full of them. I feel like some of Spielberg's so-called lesser movies are underrated and could use a rewatch, keeping in mind all the techniques he employs. If you enjoyed this video, consider hitting the like and subscribe button, as I'll be posting more content in the future. Thanks for watching.